Okay, Mark said he can hear us. Okay.
Good.
Welcome, family, to this highly anticipated program on the Empower Hour talk show. I am AlQamar.
And I'm Hanifah.
And if you guys do not know this special guest here with us, well, hang on to your seats because you are in for an exciting 1-hour program. We have on us the one and only with us, Dr. Naim Akbar. Thank you so much, Doctor, for taking time out to join us on our program to talk to us this evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing great now, and I thank you for the invitation. And despite my reluctance, I'm here anyway.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Doing some pulling. I was like, please come.
So thank you very much for inviting me.
For being so gracious. Dr. Naim Akbar is a clinical psychologist, well known for his Afrocentric approach to psychology. He is a distinguished scholar, public speaker, and author of several well-known books, such as Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery, Know Thyself, Visions for Black Men, Akbar Papers in African Psychology, from Miseducation to Education, and so many more. Dr. Akbar offers us brilliant insight into the mind of matters specifically related to our sojourn here in the hells of North America. You will undoubtedly leave this hour more empowered than when you came. That's a guarantee. Please lend us your ears and eyes as we welcome the one and only Dr. Naim Akbar.
That's a great introduction. Thank you.
Oh, sure thing. That's the least we could do here on the Empower Hour. We chose the topic Black on Black blame psychosis. And I know when I shot that over to you, you was like, what is that?
Right. I'm still wondering.
Well, the reason I came up with that narrative is because I'm very active on the social media platforms, and I'm noticing a lot as of late, so much infighting, so much conflict between each other, where in my opinion, I think it's a lot of misdirected anger, where, you know, we're frustrated and we're at boiling points for, you know, so much of the things that we have to contend with in this society. And I feel like we take our frustrations out on each other, but then the one who is the author of our frustrations, they go unscathed. So that was the purpose of the Black on Black blame psychosis. That was my thinking when I came up with that terminology.
Okay. All right, that helps. Well, you know, I think you're really on target because I think that your observation is a valid one, and it is not something new. The fact that we have tended to turn on each other at times when frustration became at its peak, and when things became most painful, we would often strike out at each other because we were most reachable within the family, and that's a maladaptive way of dealing with problems, but it's a convenient way of dealing with it. You know, let me kind of back up. I think that in reality we've got one war, but two major battlefronts going on. And the war, of course, is to try to rescue and restore ourselves as a people, to restore our humanity, to restore our peoplehood as Africans, as people who represent, who have suffered a fairly devastating experience through the enslavement, the colonization, and all that we've gone through over the last 400 years without confrontation with Europeans. One of those battle fronts of this war, which is one war, but two battle fronts. One of the battle fronts is, of course, the the anti-racism aspect. In other words, trying to counteract the oppression and counteract the oppressor. And so I think there's a lot of effort and energy and a lot of effort goes into trying to correct, to heal, and to somehow make better, and to try to correct the perpetrator of all these things we're going through. Because racism is a reality. It's not to be denied. It certainly is the cause of a lot of the issues that we have and we've experienced. But I think that that's just one of the battlefronts. The other battlefront, and I think that people differ on where their energies tend to go. The other battlefront is, how do we begin to restore our minds as a people? Whether we're going to put our energy into trying to restore ourselves, or if we're going to put our energy into trying to correct the cause of the problem. Now, I prefer to put my energy in the restoration of our minds as a people. That doesn't deny that racism is a problem, that racists still exist, that we are still very much in hell by the causes of all of that. That doesn't deny that. It simply means that if I'm going to expend a great deal of energy, I want to try to restore the magnitude of who we are and what we can be. And a part of that is healing ourselves. And a part of the healing has to do with trying to correct the kind of self-destructive and self-negating things that we have learned and we have developed as a result of our oppression. One of those kinds of things is the tendency to attack each other, to blame each other, and somehow turn our anger and aggression against each other. That's because a part of what the experience of racism, oppression, and slavery has done, it has somehow taken our minds, and rather than making us concerned about the survival and development of ourselves, we've internalized the agenda of the oppressor. So we are much more concerned about protecting them than trying to protect ourselves. We are much more concerned about trying to ensure that they are made better without attending to making ourselves better. We're much more concerned very often about trying to deconstruct the nature of the racism than trying to reconstruct the reality and the power of who we are. So I think that the black on black blaming that we do, the inner family fighting that we do, I think it's a result of the maladaptation that we've learned from the centuries of oppression that we've experienced that has robbed us of our own self-interest. And I believe we need to restore our self-interest. That's a long answer, but that's kind of like how I see it.
Is there is there a concurrent approach to this, or should one take place before the other? So should the focus and the energy be in building ourselves psychologically, physically, spiritually first, and then focus on that, or should we focus on that at all and just focus on building ourselves first, and then these things sort of, I don't know that racism works itself out, but is it something that can be done concurrently, where someone is working on themselves and also working on reconstruction, but also working on like destruction as well, destroying the racism that's already in place? Is that possible? Do we have the capacity to do that as oppressed people in this land?
Yes, I think that just like in any other war, there are specialists. I mean, there's an Air Force and there's a Navy, and the Navy focuses on the sea enemy, or the enemy coming from the sea. The Air Force focuses on the enemy that's coming from the air. And I think that you have specialists in terms of dealing with what battlefront you're going to work on. And I think it's the same with our community. I don't believe that all of us have the patience, the stamina, and even the faith or the hope to somehow be engaged in dealing with anti-racism, anti-racist work. I think that many people have sort of like despaired of that, and to say like, okay, I'm not sure that we can heal those people. And so let people do that. However, we cannot ignore that. We are living in the belly of the beast. We're living in a situation where we are constantly at the mercy of the kind of destructive consequences of being in the hands of racists. So people have to attend to that. Otherwise, we get wiped out. We will get destroyed if someone starts doing that. However, I believe that there are other people who clearly, and I'm one of them, who really feels that my energy is best used to try to restore the greatness and the power of who we are. I believe that we have so much potential that's unrealized, that as the battles are being fought against the concurrent enemy, we have to really begin to somehow deal with healing and restoring ourselves. Let me give you an example. There's this whole controversy now about critical race theory, and the whole idea of how whether or not it should be taught, it should be there or not. Critical race theory has one objective if you are directing it towards trying to teach white people critical race theory, and it has another objective if you're teaching Black people about that. If you're directing critical race theory towards trying to educate white people about that, the intention of teaching them that is operating under the assumption that if we can educate you, you will correct your behavior. Right. And I think that's the objective for it. Somehow you need to know this, because if you know how racism is worked, the assumption is you will then begin to alter your behavior. I'm not sure everybody believes that, but I think that's the underlying agenda. My belief is that Black people need to understand critical race theory, because they need to understand that despite the barbarity, the destructiveness, and the brutality of racism and the race system and all that we've gone through, we survived it. We rose above it. By angel, still we rise. So the fact that we went through all of that and still we stand with our humanity intact, that's the lesson that we need to learn about ourselves, because that teaches us so much about our potential. That in that image, in that reality, in that image of understanding that through all of this ugliness, through all of this barbarity that we've survived, we've come out with our humanity intact. In fact, we are more human in the highest sense of the word than our oppressors are. We have a moral sense. We have a human concern. We're actually even able to deal with our enemies in a humanly constructive way, in a way that the enemies can't even deal with themselves. And so with that idea is that we take the same medicine, if you will, and apply it to ourselves in one way, because it is to teach us our strength and not to preoccupy us with our victimization. If we deal with critical race theory as a means of simply reminding us of our victimization, then it is misapplied. That's not the objective of it. The objective should be to teach us that, yes, look at what they did. Look what happened to us, but look at us now. Look at what we have here. And behind that is a reminder of the fact that we were the patriarchs of what is human on this planet. And therefore we can restore that by building on the realization of what we've gone through with this.
Well, now, how do we do that in light of the enemy seeking to destroy us in every way imaginable? So I feel you, and I'm in agreement with you. But how do you keep moving and keep going when there's bombs blowing, booming above your head at every step? So how is, are you understanding where I'm coming from?
Yes. Yeah, and there's no doubt. And that's what I alluded to by saying we've got to have counterattackers. We've got to have people who attend to that. We've got to have people who are willing to face the enemy, those bombs that are constantly going off, and to constantly confront them about that. And that's why I don't raise any questions and don't for a minute consider it as unimportant that there are people who are willing and consider it as important to fight racism and to fight and to consider themselves counter-racist. They are the counter-racist forces. That's our forces to do that. However, I don't believe that we should expect everybody to do the same thing. So we should expect them and support them and encourage those people who want to be the counter-racist warriors to do that, and to not condemn them because they are not over here fighting the war to restore when they are fighting the war to somehow protect our survival because of those bombs that are constantly going off. And you're right, every day. And we found out over the last 4 years that the level of the opposition and how blatant the opposition is. And what we learned during the last 4 years of the last administration is really what the ongoing realities of racism really are in this time. And it is not something back in slavery, back in the civil rights movement, back in the 60s, but it is now, today, every day, in 2021, 2020, 2019, 2018, so yes, that's what he's going. But at the same time, we can't ever expect everyone to do the same thing. So I don't expect everyone to be committed to doing the work to try to restore our humanity as I've tried to commit my life to doing. I don't believe that everyone has to do that, but I've got to be about the work to try to find out how we continue to do this. Like what you're doing with this show, this is a part of the restoration work, but simultaneously, what you're addressing in this empowerment is also addressing the issues that consistently move against us. You're addressing the enemy, but ultimately, by the title of the show, you're about empowerment, and empowerment is rebuilding and restoring. So you have to do both concurrently. I think Sister Hanifah said earlier, can you do them both concurrently? You have to do them both concurrently. And I think people have to identify their strengths and their beliefs and move on that.
So one of the things that comes to mind, one of your books that I absolutely love is The Community of Self. And it sounds like you're sort of touching a lot, not a little bit, a lot on that. And in the book, you talk a lot about the different functions of the body and why the body would still be out of balance if one particular function was to lead over the other. So it sounds like you're kind of like touching on that quite a bit. And I want you to go a little deeper into it, because when AlQamar started off the program by talking about the blame thing, we often see that in our community where there are conversations that are happening. Some may call them debates. And someone would say, well, what do you do for the community? And someone might say, well, all you do is talk, or all you're doing is you're on the internet and that's all you do. Or someone might be, there are people who are in the streets, right? And they find people who are on the internet just teaching repulsive in a sense. So when we get together and we have these conversations, we start to measure each other's worth, right? By the contribution, the so-called contributions that we think each person is making. So there are some of us who are focused, for example, on financial literacy, right? Yeah. There are some of us who are focused on health as far as diet and so forth. There are people like you, right, who are focused on the mind, our psychology, right? Yeah. So everyone is still, to me, these are different approaches to the same problem.
Yes.
So you speak a little bit more to that, as far as everyone not being at the forefront, everyone not functioning the same, but still having the same focus, but approaching it from different, angles. Can you speak a little bit more into that, please?
Yeah, I think that I think that's what I found when I did that early little book, Community of Self, was that the whole allegory of how the body has like varied functions that are specialists. I mean, hands do hand stuff, feet do feet stuff, eyes do eye stuff. The eyes don't try to hear, the eyes do the seeing. The mouth does the tasting, the eating stuff. So I'm saying each part of the body has a specialization. I talked about the community of the self in terms of its psychological functions. You know, there's a part of us that is our senses. A part of us is our appetites. A part of us has to do with the motives, the things that kind of drive us. I mean, these things, each thing does its own thing. And that's why I'm thinking what we need to apply in understanding this problem of blame, as well as how we assess effective functioning, is to understand that there is that a community. One of the ideas that the Africans understand about the human being, I talked about it more in my other book, Know Thyself, that somehow we are a community. We are extended selves. In other words, I am not all of us. I am because you are because I am. That doesn't mean something just philosophical. That means that you are about doing the things that I can't do. You're about doing the things that you do well. That's your specialization. I don't expect you to do me. You do you, and I'll do me. And each person has to be respectful of what they're doing their part. I think that one of the mistakes that we make, and this is a part of our miseducation coming from the whole idea of the kind of egotistical idea of individualism that is so strident in this community, in this culture, in Western culture. And this whole idea that like everybody feels that you have to do it their way. Right. And it's all about doing it my way or no way at all. My way is the only correct way to do it. Look, there are people who are going to rap about it. There are people who are going to sing about it. There are people who are going to dance about it. There are people who are going to do mathematics about it. There are people who are going to do money about it. There are people who are going to do psychology about it. There are people who are going to, everybody does different things. Some people are going to cook about it. Some people are going to clean about it. You know, some people are going to cry about it, you know. So we have all different specialists that we have to understand, and we have to understand we are working as a community of extended resources that we have to work on with our people. So we have to look at look at the goal that we share that brings us all together in terms of coordinating those things. But I think a part of the problem that leads to the black on black self-on-self blame is the kind of arrogant egotism that makes us believe that you're not doing it right unless you're doing it the way that I'm doing it. So there are lots of ways to be African, because being African is ultimately being human, you know. And being human is about engaging in this process of uplifting the collective reality of who it is and what we're all about. We need to respect that and to understand that that's all right. You know, there are people who are going to do Harvard. Let them do Harvard, and do Harvard with the objective of how we can use Harvard to liberate ourselves. Right. There are people who are going to be at HBCUs. Let them do HBCUs and then make Morehouse and Howard and Spelman and Tuskegee become the most revolutionary places on the planet in terms of restoring what it is Africa to be. But everybody can't do HBCU. Everybody can't do Harvard. Everybody can't do Yale. But we need them all. We need them all. Everybody can't do just education, you know. We need all aspects. And that's what a community has various specialties working for the common good. And that's what we have to be about.
Ashe. In that same light, what does unity look like then to you, according to you know, the way you view it? Because I know some of us feel like all of us have to be on all the same accord in order to be unified to enable to get anything done, you know. And then, you know, some of us have the understanding that it doesn't take a lot of people at all to move or redirect the energy of the nation. What is your perspective on what unity looks like?
Okay, I think that one of the ways to understand unity is to understand what it's not. Unity is not uniformity.
Mhm.
Uniformity means that everybody has to be doing the same thing the same way at the same time.
Mhm.
So we have to all speak the same, we have to all speak Swahili in order to be uniformly Afrocentric. We have to all wear the same dashiki import in order to be Afrocentric. I mean, the thing of it is that that's uniformity. And we spend a lot of time, we have to all wear our hair in a certain style in order to be appropriately Afrocentric, if you will. So I think that we need to understand that the thing that unifies us is the commonality of our goal. Mm. We have to have a common focus. And as we all move towards that goal, the diversity of the paths becomes less of an issue. We have to stay clear about what the goal is all about. And I think I'm thinking that that goal should be understood as how do we restore the sovereignty, the effectiveness, and the independence of being the people who we were before our peoplehood was invaded and assaulted by the experiences of the last 400 or 500 years. Mm-hmm. And I believe that we need to be clear about that goal. And I think that's what the re-education process is about. That's what this type of media activity is all about. That's what writing is about. That's what research is all about. That's what teaching is all about. It's about moving in that goal. So the musicians who are trying to restore that kind of consciousness, they are doing the same goal as the professor who is doing the research on Kemet, on ancient Kemet, and how it represented the peak of ancient classical African civilization. I mean, those kinds of ideas are all about the same thing if we understand it, if it's achieving that same goal and objective of trying to take us to the point of trying to free our minds and to restore our humanity.
Yes. And I want to bring Ishmael in on the conversation. He had a question on the stream, which was one of mine as well. He asks, can you address the psychology related to sophisticated marketing intended to confuse our children?
Sophisticated marketing is no more than like miseducation with a college degree. In other words, this is not something new. It's just that the apparatus for doing it has now been expanded because of the power of the media, the power of the marketing devices to somehow miseducate. So whereas when Carter G. Woodson talked about miseducation, he was talking about what went on in the classroom, because that was the primary source of how we began to get the information to begin to influence how we understand who we are, and what we're all about, how we begin to learn the kinds of tools that we need to somehow master the environments we're living in. And that's the purpose of knowing and learning. It has always been to the advantage of the oppressor to somehow sell us a bill of goods, if you will. In other words, to miseducate us, to give us a sense of objectives, a sense of goals, a sense of ideas that would make us have their interests in heart rather than our own interests. So this whole idea of having the goal of providing and advancing ourselves as a people is in fact the human human aspiration of what education is really all about. So I believe that like marketing is simply just a more sophisticated way of doing old stuff. And it's just much more advanced now in terms of the way it can impact. It also requires that we have to be much more observant and much more careful about the degree to which we subject our young children, our minds, and ourselves to those influences, because it's coming at us from so many directions that we don't understand. And in fact, the whole idea of this kind of programming that we thought we were on top of as we begin to learn about, just the basics of miseducation, we now don't realize that we are actually paying to drive ourselves crazy. So we can't live without our phones, without our devices. We can't, I mean, our children at 12 years old can't live without their devices. And they're constantly being programmed by tick, tock, tock, tick, you name it, like constantly being programmed subliminally as well as consciously by ideas that are not only destructive to us as a people, but destructive to their humanity. It begins to neutralize their basic human reactions. It's easy for this generation of young people to kill each other because death no longer has a finality. Because who gets killed on the screen for 1 minute is right back a few minutes later. And so their concept of even the finality of death is not being internalized. So I'm saying that the severity of how this the constant onslaught of this marketing and all that goes on in the media makes us much more vulnerable than we ever have been before.
Yeah, I think of all the horror movies that the depictions of, you know, just gruesomeness and things like that, and we actually go and pay to sit down and enjoy ourselves, to, you know, to fill ourselves up with murder and death and rape, and, you know, it's just it's fascinating. We, like you said, it's so subconscious to the point that we don't even realize what we do. We actually think we're being entertained. Well, in certain ways, it has become a source of entertainment.
It is entertainment, but it neutralizes us to like basic human revulsion, you know. So a part of what helps people remain morally correct, I don't mean thou shalt not, I mean just simply being sensitive to not being barbaric, to not do things that were done to us, say for example, in slavery. The thing that makes it possible, makes people just personally revolted by the idea of consciously and intentionally hurting people because you want to see them in pain, to watch them bleed. I mean, there's a basic human revulsion to that. That we have a generation of people who've been absolutely neutralized to that basic revulsion because of the constant diet of the things you're describing. So those kinds of ugly images that are constantly feeding us have kind of neutralized that fundamental response of like, you know, it's just like human death becomes like roadkill. You know, there's a dog that's run over in the street. So let's keep going. Don't get your feet bloody. You know?
Considering how the brain works, right? And considering what they call epigenetics, considering neuroplasticity, and all of those things, we're talking about programming. So understand how the brain works as far as programming. There is something to that I don't think that we consider enough, that it is possible to reprogram our minds and reprogram ourselves. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what does that look like for Black people? What can we begin to do to, for example, like almost like create a glitch in the programming, right? That was, and how do we begin to reprogram our mind towards becoming our best selves?
Right. Okay. That's a good question. I think it's a very difficult one, mainly because we control so few of the devices that are engaged in the programming, you know, and that makes us kind of impotent in terms of being able to do that to the degree we should. That would be most helpful. But I think that that means that we really do have to defiantly take responsibility for our children and our communities in ways that really, given the progressive mindset of the society we're in, we have to somehow exert a level of control to somehow recognize what's good and what's right, and to somehow enforce that to the degree to which we can control that. You know, for an example, it's almost impossible to even have this conversation now. But when my children were growing up. That was like in the early 80s. It was one of my firm ideas was that they should not have a TV in their room. Now, there was a TV in the house, but the TV in the house was one that we all had to watch at the same time. Now, that was very cruel and unusual for good bourgeois people, because all, the measure of being good middle-class Negroes is that the children had a TV in their room. No, that gave them too much access to garbage that I could not monitor. If they had the one TV that we all watched, or if they were watching it, I was watching them watch it, then that means I was able to somehow monitor and select what they were being programmed with. That's very difficult now with everybody with his own iPhone, with their own Apple Movies, with their own Netflix account, and they're constantly being able to get access to that. But I'm saying that the more that we are able and willing to be real live parents and to understand that parenting is not something that is a violation, it's a responsibility. And to be able to do that. And one of the things that good parenting does, it makes you parent yourself.
Yes.
You understand? So if you make them do the right thing, that forces you to do more the right thing. Yep. So you can't be watching all the garbage if you are in fact monitoring what they're watching on this one TV that all of you watching, And so I'm saying that we have to begin to take as much control of that as we possibly can. Back to the whole question of unity we were talking about, we really do need to support and to support each other in restoring and building community. One of the painful things about this whole COVID thing is that it really disrupted the degree to which we had kind of survival communities going around. There were places, sometimes they were in churches, sometimes they were in like cultural groups in the community, lecture groups once a week or whatever. In DC, there was the Crest Welsing group that were coming, meeting once a week, Tony Browder's a group that was there. Communities had ways of engaging in things that reinforced sanity. And we then have to take responsibility for creating apparati that let us encourage and support each other in being sane. And that's just work. And that's a part of the work we have to do.
Yeah. Ray is on this line. He says, Dr. Akbar, can we not take more control through the use of meditation and learning how to turn off the devices and learn how to connect with the internal?
Absolutely. Yeah, that requires us to commit ourselves to another agenda. Yeah. And I'm saying that we then can't keep up with the latest pop culture of the Eurocentric society if we're going to be engaged in meditation and trying to cultivate our own self-awareness. Yes, but absolutely, we need to do alternative things. But that's what I'm talking about in terms of fostering the development of the kind of support networks and support groups that gives us encouragement as well as strength to begin to build our own self-awareness to our own advantage, and to not somehow be subject and completely at the mercy of the infusion of all the negative ideas coming from other places. But yes, absolutely right.
And that's kind of been the song of my heart for like the past couple of months is take control of your own programming. But one of the things I realized in that is that we really don't understand how deeply programmed we are until we begin to deprogram. Yeah. Because you begin to start, when you just detaching from social media itself is a struggle. Okay. Yeah. It's like you said, it's the idea of we're missing something. You know, it's the idea of social media is all there is to the world. Like this becomes your world. And so I'm kind of processing through that right now. But I wanted to go back to individualism. So as far as individualism goes, I know African culture has always been a collectivist culture, right? So when we talk about individualism, is can you go into how people can not practice individualism but still remain an individual? How is that possible? Because I think when we talk about individualism, I think oftentimes we get two things confused, where someone is an individual, like AlQamar is unique to me, right? Doesn't mean that AlQamar is, because she's expressing that uniqueness, mean that she is practicing individualism. So can you explain a little further as far as how do we as African people, who we express on so many levels, you know, we are vibrant, colorful people, right? How do we express our individualism without practicing individualism in the European idea of what individualism looks like?
Right, right.
You know, sorry.
No, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think that in this kind of cultural in this kind of context, the two things will often run into conflict with each other. That somehow your effort to be individually who you are can come into conflict with the kind of the kind of collective goal that goes along with that. But I believe that at the same time that Africans, traditional African culture is collective in its its general orientation, it also is very respectful of individual expression. Right. And I believe that as we explore and understand who we are as individuals, as well as who we are as a part of families, as a part of societies, as a part of cultural groups, we expand our general awareness to see ourselves in the broader context. But we have to understand that we each come equipped with unique characteristics. And a part of self-understanding is to understand what are your special gifts, you know, and how do you express those special gifts? You know, I cannot sing. I don't care how much I love music. I cannot carry a tune in a bucket. If you gave me a bucket that was completely non-porous, I could not carry a tune in it, you know. I love music, you know. That doesn't make me less of a good person. It doesn't make me less of a brother with soul.
Right.
I just can't sing, you know. But you know, I can talk. I've been running my mouth ever since I said my first words back at like 14 months old or whatever it was, you know. And so, but I'm saying that's how I express who I am, and therefore I cultivate that. And I don't expect that that Luther Vandross was any less of a person because he could sing but not talk like I talk, you know. Right. And so the idea is that we have to understand how to respect not only our unique gifts, right, but the unique gifts of other people. You know, the unique gifts of other people. People come with their unique gifts, and they have to be respected. And every child, I have three children. All three of them are very different people, but they all have a common vision, and they share the common vision, and that's what unites us as a family who are committed to the restoration of them and freeing the minds of African people. One is a lawyer, one is a businessman, one is an educator, and I mean they all do it their way, but they do it their way while being possessed of the common vision that we share collectively.
I love that.
I'm glad you mentioned respecting of other people's gifts, because I'm not sure if you are familiar with this whole term called cancel culture.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's currently been mulling around and stuff. And I think that's part of what some of the pushback has been about when people talk about that term, is because it seems that it's a large percentage of us out there who can't find the compassion in themselves to forgive those who make mistakes.
Mhm,
And so if
mhm.
they make one mistake or they go anti against something they hold dear to themselves, that person then becomes canceled. They don't want anything to do with them. They may have said something they disagreed with. And so now they don't want anything to do with them ever again in life. Can you talk to us a little bit about why that is, or you know, how is it unhealthy, and if so, why? And you know, just give us a little bit of breakdown into that type of thing.
But you know, I really think that takes us back to what we were talking about earlier about uniformity versus unity. You know, and I think that unfortunately, a part of being in the desperate circumstances that we face, and I mean, like being under constant threat, and like we are as a people under constant threat, like you described early on. These bombs are going off everywhere. I mean, if it's not George Floyd, it's a march on, you know, they're tearing up the Capitol, getting ready to kill us and kill somebody else. They're trying to revoke that, take away the right to vote, want you to vote, don't want you to vote. I mean, you know, vote for them, don't vote for them, be educated, don't be educated. I mean, there's a constant bombardment. So I think that being under that kind of threat, and this is part of what feeds that blame thing that we were talking about earlier as well, which was the theme of the program, is that under those conditions of constant stress and duress tends to make people very intolerant of people not being what you think they ought to be. So what you perceive as necessary for your particular survival, you attribute to everybody else. And therefore you become very intolerant of anybody who doesn't do it your way, you know. And I think that that's real problematic because it really begins to kill the creativity and the power that comes from the diversity within our community. Now, we like to talk about that white people should give up racism and practice diversity because diversity strengthens institutions and things like that. So we offer it as a cure for how white people should change how to heal racist institutions. But we don't understand how the tolerance of diversity with our own communities strengthens us as a community as well. Yeah. You do not have to be uniform in order to be united. Yeah. And that's, I think, the theme of how you begin to heal that. And anything that begins to help us build on that respect for appreciating the importance of having a common goal. And the common goal is the liberation of our people by whatever means necessary. And that's what we have to begin to respect. You know?
Thank you for saying that, because as AlQamar was asking the question, the first thing that came to my mind is groupthink, right? And why that happens. There's a fear because there's a lot of people who are now coming into consciousness, what we call consciousness, Black consciousness.
Yes.
And we have to really be careful of like not allowing a safe space, for lack of a better term, for individual expression, because what happens is groupthink. A lot of people in this that jumps on the bandwagon as far as cancel culture, they don't even really know why they're canceling. They don't even really know what their own conviction about the matter is. But when you're new to consciousness, you're going to come in and you're going to say, oh, well, this is what it means to be pro-Black. So I need to jump on board with that, right? And so we have to be I feel like we have to be very careful with that and allow, like you said, let's honor our diversity, right? Because the reality is that the unity that we look for, the true unity that we're looking for, can only come when we begin to honor our own diversity within our own individual expressions. Otherwise, it's just as you said earlier, it's not unity, it ends up being uniformity, right? Yes. Uniformity is so boring. Who wants to do that, right?
But it's also destructive. It's like you said, nothing is more destructive than groupthink. To have a lot of automatons walking around like in the same, to the same cadence, but not knowing where they're going, you know. And that's a lot of what I see.
I think of the vaccination when you say that.
The vaccination, right.
I'm sorry, but go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, make your point with that.
No, when you just said that, that's the first thing that popped in my head, the whole uniformity of us going along and doing something all together in a group without really understanding what we're doing, without having the nuances of the information to determine if we're really making a informed decision and an intelligent decision. But we do because the media is saying, do it, go get the shot. And you look around and you see your aunt doing it and your neighbors doing it and your cousins doing it. And so you feel like you don't want to be on the outside of that. So the group think it's like we're comforted. We're social creatures by nature. And so I think we're comforted in knowing that, okay, I'm part of what everybody, I'm in what everybody else is doing. And so, but anyway, that's just the thought that came to my mind when you talk.
No, I think that's very true. I think I think that the more threatened we are, whatever the condition may be, whether it's the threat of death from COVID or the threat of like being killed by the Klan or the local police department, the greater the threat is, the more we are like subject to falling into a pattern of a kind of like just mass conformity rather than understanding. But I believe that we really do have to find a criteria that we can apply under any circumstance to determine what is a norm for us, what is correct. And we have to use that criteria independent of what's being fed to us through the various programming devices. And we have to be critical, but not stupid in our criticism. I mean, some people just adopt a stance of like criticizing anything, without trying to understand what. It's just like if it came from that, it's wrong, it's got to be wrong because it came from them. Right. So we have to find some kind of criteria, and we have to find something we can trust to give us information that we don't have. But I think groupthink is the worst kind of solution to that problem.
Okay, so someone, Adiba, asked a question in the chat. I hope, Adiba, I'm going to say she, I hope I'm saying it right. How do we engage in accountability without falling into cancel culture? So how can we hold each other accountable without the need to cancel each other?
That's a good question, Adiba.
That is a good question. I think that's almost a kind of a kind of a cultural control mechanism that kind of evolves. In other words, the more consistent that we are and try to be in terms of keeping our course and our focus clear, the more we could use the movement towards that goal and objective as our criteria for what is in fact acceptable movement and acceptable conduct. And I think that means then that we have to have a much more common base of knowledge, a much more common source of how we begin to get information and how we begin to transmit that information to each other. So I think that this is where the commonality has to serve. I'm sorry. This is where the commonality of the uniformity has to serve as kind of like a counterforce to like individualism run awry, because individuality can become egotism, and we've got a whole lot of that as a problem as well. A lot of people who are only right because they are right. This is the way I see it. And this is the way I read it. I saw this in Malcolm's book. I heard this in one of Dyson's speeches or whatever. And so we have this very limited notion of how we determine what's real. So I think that we need to have, and the more opportunities we have to engage in things such as this kind of dialogue, such as opportunities to engage in the kind of the community exchange, the more we can begin to refine a kind of a sense of what becomes the kind of the cultural norm that is acceptable but not prohibitive. So you don't want to rob people of their creative capability, but simultaneously they do have to be accountable to a bigger kind of objective.
So getting back to the blame thing, I just want to ask, this is my last question. How much of the attacks on each other that we often see in the community, how much of that is our own projections of our internal, one, self-hate, and two, struggles or conflict? How much of that is us projecting our own internal self-hate and internal self-conflicts or unresolved issues onto each other, and how much of that is just solely human nature? And I ask about the human nature because sometimes we discuss Black people as if we are in this vacuum, and we dehumanize ourselves. You know, we have the brain just like everybody else and the certain makeup, and somehow we act like because I am Black, somehow that means that I am not allowed to have these complex human expressions or experiences. So that's why I ask, how much of it is just simply being human, and how much of it is just us projecting our own internal issues onto each other?
Yeah, whatever the mathematical proportions may be are irrelevant. Your point is well taken. I think that it is a combination of all of those. Now, what degree of the combination and what are the proportions of the combination, I don't know. But I don't think that's relevant. I think the relevant point is what you're making, and that is it's some of both. It's definitely some of both. And I think a lot of it is a part of that, the human frailty kind of thing. You know, we mess up, we distort. Human beings distort reality. We do cognitively crazy stuff. You know, we don't see things well, you know. And I think that certainly is a part of what we're doing, you know. And then you put on top of that the frailties and the injuries. That's the word I want. The injuries that we are bringing from our experiences, our condition. With what have you gone through? We've gone through. I mean, this thing has been hell. I mean, like you don't treat human beings the way we've been treated. That's why it's so phenomenal that we are engaged in this high level interaction and conversation. Not only we are doing it here, but at the level at which we have been able to master every arena of human activity that we can find within society, from engineering to knitting to quilt making. We've mastered it all. So it's utterly phenomenal that we've been able to maintain any of those high level skills. I mean, we've mastered all the Western culture and as well as preserved our own and synthesized them into something entirely different. I mean, that's utterly phenomenal, you know. So we bad as hell. We so bad. I mean, like, I'd be scared of us too, you know, because if we woke up and found out that Black lives matter to Black people, if we begin to matter to ourselves and stop trying to convince white people that we matter to them, if we woke up in one morning and decided that Black lives do matter to us, we would be a formidable force to deal with because we'd start looking after ourselves. And that's where I think we're going. That's where I think we've got to go.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah. The whole hope thing. And for me, it's even gotten to a place, I think, where some folks are just, they don't even believe in that anymore. You know, you mentioned hope and have faith and be encouraged, and you know, and it's, you know, they turn against even that. So what do you say to those who have like given up all hope and see the glass half empty and feel like they're, you know, there's nowhere to go from here but downhill? What would be your advice to those like that?
We have to go back to Jesse's old idea: keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. I mean, like I think that we have to. I think, and it almost becomes becomes almost at the level of a chant, where we begin to we begin to restore it to our spirits, and with all of the limitations and all the devastation and the manipulation of the church, the fact that the church became an environment that we were able to maintain our spiritual aspirations for something bigger than what we had. I mean, the fact that it was a kennel or a fireplace, a melting place to preserve faith. Now, I'm not going to get into what we had faith in. And certainly the images we had faith in is questionable. But the fact that we need to have places in our communities that can restore faith and keep the hope alive, because it really is necessary, because we need the hope to ignite the energy to begin to bring us into the transformation that's possible and that's very much necessary.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dr. Akbar, you are an amazing, amazing individual. This is my favorite book of yours.
Thank you.
Chains of Psychological Slavery. I actually gave my son this book recently to read himself. It was such an impact. I read this early on in my life.
Great.
Yep, Community of Self is another one. Sister Hanifah mentioned that book early on. And you do have several. How many books do you have published?
There are 7 that are in print.
Okay.
There's 7 in print. Know Thyself, that's kind of like what I like. And Visions for Black Men, New Visions for Black Men, is another one that's there. Life of Ancient Africa is another title, But I don't need to tell you, since you're familiar with books, I intentionally did not write my books to other psychologists. I wrote my books so that if you've got an 8th grade education and you'll stop and read, you can read them and understand what it's about, because I didn't want to talk to psychologists in this highly lofty theoretical language that nobody understood but the scholars.
That happens, yep.
So every one of those books was intentionally less than 100 pages, in little chapters, big print, and with words that hopefully, if you'll sit there for a few minutes, you can read it and understand what it's about. And that was intentionally done,
Thank you.
So that's not being anti-intellectual. I got a PhD, I can talk to big talk if I need to, but I don't need to talk to other psychologists about this. I need to talk to the brothers who locked up at the joint. I need to talk to the young people who are coming into awareness. Let them begin to read and get those ideas and internalize them in themselves. That's what we want to try to do.
We had another question. Obari says, with the incredible groundwork you've laid, what would it look like for the younger generation, students of yours, to manifest your vision, to bring your words to life, to continue the next step of your legacy? What would that look like for you, Baba?
Continuing to do, I think, well, he pretty much lays it out. I mean, you begin to try to implement the things that we've talked about. So the things we've mentioned tonight, having those kinds of cultural activities and community activities that keeps us hopeful, keeps us with faith, keeps us clear about where we're going. Beginning to take responsibility for our children and for our families and our communities as young people. So if you're going to be a young man, then don't talk about what an African warrior looks like. Show me by what you do as a father and as a husband, as a mate, as a partner, as a friend. Show me by what you do and not by what you talk about. So we're kind of beyond the level of conversation, which is a part of why my retirement kind of required me to kind of step back and stop talking because I think the talking needs to be a little subdued. I certainly want the ideas to be out there, but I think that we need to talk less and do more. And I believe that the young people should do more, And I also think we should be more respectful of how we preserve the best that our elders have done and can do, I've really, it pained me to see so many of the elders who were before me kind of drained by our communities and then left to die, I mean, like they all were sort of like discarded once they burned themselves out. And I selected not to do that. I selected to somehow, I think I gave 40, 50 years of very hard work to our communities. And so I decided to spend this time with my grandchildren, hanging out with my children, spending time doing what I wanted to do, working on nobody's agenda but my own. And I think because it turns out that when I became ill, when I become ill, it's my family who comes to look after me.
Right.
They're the ones who care to make sure I'm taken care of.
That's
And
right.
all those people who are saying, "Where's Doc? He's not talking anymore. He hadn't been to a conference in over 5 years." You're right. I'm not coming anymore. I'm not coming. I'm through doing that. I've done that, you know. And I think that because and I'm going to give time to those who are going to look after me as my needs begin to expand to be taken care of by someone. So I want to be taken care of. And I want to be able, while I'm still able to offer time and resources to those people who are going to care for me.
Oh, Shay, that's the importance of the nucleus family.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have to get it together so we can all do what you're doing right now.
Absolutely.
One day ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we thank you so much for coming on and joining us and coming out of your retirement for 1 hour to spend with us. We appreciate you so much for that. Hanifah, I'm sorry, did you have something to share?
I just wanted to tell Dr. Akbar, thank you for coming on. And thank you for speaking so strongly and so clearly about individual expression in the community, because I know that that is at the root of a lot of our conflict with, you know, there's a lot of ego involved, where it's, if you're not doing it the way I'm doing it, then you're not right, and you might as well not do it. And so there's a lot of that. And so I'm so glad that you spoke to that, because I know that our listening audience, that's something that all of us need to take with us, carry it with us in our back pockets, in our front pockets, wherever, but just take it with us, so that when we run into each other, individual expression, that we create room and allow for that to happen, you know, and we allow for each other to grow, because we are not children. We have to allow each other to grow up. So I just wanted to let you know, I appreciate that. And I thank you, because you did not have to be here. And I know it was reluctantly, but you are here, right?
Thank you.
And I am grateful. Thank you so much.
and look, and thank you for what you are doing. You're carrying on, I think it was Brother Abari who asked what you should do. You're doing what the younger generation should be doing. You're carrying on that work in a way that matches this age at this time. So you'll reach the people that I would never be able to reach using the mechanisms that I use. So keep doing what you're doing. And even though I reluctantly came, I'm really glad that I did. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. And just Michelle, final, I will give her the last word. She says, yes, I miss you so much, but I understand you must take care of yourself. I love you, appreciate your labor and scholarship. That was Michelle.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the evening.
And they can get your books wherever books are sold?
Yeah, you can really get them on Amazon. There is African World Books in Baltimore. Brother Nati has them there. You know, so most any of the Black bookstores would have them. You know.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, family. That is our hour. We just ask that you do what you do so well out there. Get the word out. Spread it. That is the purpose for our program. It serves us none to be in a small little incubator. We need to get this message out to as many people as we possibly can. So share, share, share. And until next time, take care of each other out there, family. Peace.
Peace.
Peace.